The program is about to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's IANA presentation.
This is an intermodal container. A few pieces of sheet metal, rivets, and a coat of paint. You may want to know what's inside. Or what makes it more than just a box. But the answer isn't so simple. So, what's inside the container? A way of connecting businesses to customers, and customers to the things they need. More efficient ports, railways, and highways linked together to form a network that delivers goods to you faster than ever. The driving force behind startups and Fortune 500 companies alike. Ocean, motor, and rail carriers joined by intermediaries and suppliers, creating millions of American jobs. Goods traveling 23 billion miles a year across the North American intermodal supply chain. So, what's inside the container? More than you imagine.
Thank you for joining us for this Signature Series presentation, part of IANA's The Business of Intermodal Continues program. To get us started, please welcome James Zacharias, Assistant Vice President, Intermodal Domestic for the Canadian National Railway.
Hello everyone, I'm James Zacharias, Assistant Vice President for Intermodal at Canadian National Railway. On behalf of all of my 24,000 plus railroading colleagues at CN working across North America, I'd like to welcome you to this IANA webcast, The Voice of the Customer, part of IANA's The Business of Intermodal Continues program. I am pleased to introduce this special webcast that will focus on the customer, the reason we operate, and the most important part of the intermodal equation. 2020 has been a heck of a year, to put it mildly. We have seen challenges and opportunities in equal measure, all the while facing one of the most significant global public health challenges in a century. Throughout, the intermodal supply chain has rolled up its sleeves and rallied to continue to deliver the goods for our customers. We have a terrific panel of BCOs for you today that include a global collection of iconic footwear brands, an industry leader in building materials, and one of the most exciting omni-channel power sports retailers going. To guide the conversation, we are lucky enough to have none other than Bill Rooney of Kuehne+Nagel as our moderator. Bill's background includes various roles with steamship lines such as Sealand, CMA, CGM, and Hanjin. Bill currently serves as the Vice President of Strategic Development for Kuehne+Nagel, the global logistics provider and sea freight forwarder. Now I'll turn it over to Bill to introduce our panelists and get us started.
It was a great introduction. Thank you very much, and thanks to everyone for joining us. As was said, I'm Bill Rooney, recently from Kuehne+Nagel, and I'll just give the names initially of the great panel we have. It's Rachael Acker, who is Logistics Director for Wolverine Worldwide. We have Brad Pfeifer, who is Transportation Sourcing Leader for the Americas for Owens Corning, and Gary Smeltzer, Director of Transportation for Comoto. So those are the three, and they'll introduce themselves a bit more broadly in a moment or two. I thought I'd spend just a couple of seconds introducing things by talking briefly about where the industry is in these sort of strange times. And most of my background is from sea freight, but obviously that's connected very well to intermodal in the United States. And when you look at our world, that world of intermodal and of sea freight, it has been turned largely upside down by things that have been kicked off by COVID, but they've created a large number of issues. For example, those issues have begun in Asia and rolled forward into the United States and have rolled into the intermodal system in the United States, which makes this kind of voice of the customer event sort of very valuable because it's hitting the United States. It has for a while now, and it's going to continue to hit the United States. And I think this is a great place to start in terms of, or a great place for discussion. So to get things going a little bit sooner here, let's just run right to the panelists, and maybe I'll start with Rachael. Rachael, you can give everybody some background about yourself and your company.
Okay, so Rachael Acker, as you mentioned, Bill, I'm the Logistics Director director at Wolverine Worldwide. We do have a portfolio of about 12 to 13 different iconic brands. So anywhere from kids footwear to boots to the casual footwear, we've got it in our portfolio. My responsibilities here are global transportation. So myself and my team, pretty much it's any way you can move freight, whether it's on a boat, a barge, a train, a truck. We've gotten very creative over the past couple of years. For my own personal history, I've been with the company almost 23 years. For myself, getting into logistics, I joined the logistics team back when we made our PLG acquisition in 2012. And we needed to kind of run a couple different supply chains in parallel until we could fully integrate our business. So up until that point, I did have a larger background in doing vendor compliance and working with our customers. But this has been an exciting challenge. And I would say transportation has not thrown a single year in a row that you could repeat since I joined logistics.
Okay. Thanks, Rachel. How about Brad? How about you want to go into yourself and your company?
Absolutely. Thanks, Bill. Brad Pfeifer. First about myself, I was born and raised in Michigan, southeastern Michigan. And as a result, I started my career in the automotive industry, worked about the first half of my career with automotive in a variety of procurement and supply activities. And then about 15 years ago, moved from southeastern Michigan to northwestern Ohio, where I took employment with Owens Corning, headquartered in Toledo. And I've been here for the last 15 years doing procurement and strategic sourcing activities. Currently, I have responsibility for sourcing and strategy of the dry van space, as well as intermodal, and primarily US and Canada. A little bit about Owens Corning. As you mentioned, Bill, we're a leading building materials company. We're a global company in excess of $7 billion in annual sales in 2019. We've got 19,000 employees in more than 30 countries. We operate in three main businesses: insulation, composites, and roofing. Obviously my support is based primarily here in the US as well as in Canada. So we might get into a little bit more detail later, but that's probably enough to start.
Great, thanks, Brad. Then Gary, can you give us some background as well?
Yes, good afternoon. My background is a little bit different in the fact that my career started out as in the manufacturing side, and roughly 20 years ago, got involved with transportation, doing with a multinational window and door manufacturer based in Oregon. At that time, we were controlling all of the company's U.S. export, imports, and then foreign-to-foreign transportation activities. And it included containers and break bulk lumber. More recently, I've been with Comoto Holdings for just almost 10 years now. And Comoto Holdings is the parent company of motorcycle accessory retailer Cycle Gear, who is a brick and mortar retailer, Revzilla Motorsports, which is an online e-commerce retailer. And then more recently, we've acquired JMT Cycles, who is a hybrid retailer who has brick and mortar retail locations, as well as a significant online presence. And our transportation team oversees all of the parcel activity for all three companies, as well as LTL replenishment and ocean transportation for our exclusive brand source products that come out of China and Pakistan. So fun business to be in, and I really look forward to getting up and coming to work every day, even though
Great.
It's in my home office now.
Great. Thanks, Gary. And let's get this kicked off. I should mention, if you're not familiar with the Zoom function, you can ask questions on the chat function, and I believe Hal Powell is going to accumulate those, and we'll address those maybe with about 15 minutes to go in the session. So keep that in mind, and we certainly encourage you to ask some questions. Let's start with one question that has generated a lot of problems, and it's a thing called blank sailings. And a blank sailings, for those who don't know, is simply a canceled sailing. And what's happened in the industry is in the second quarter, worldwide, the carriers blanked, using that term, about 15% of capacity. But for example, if you were shipping from Asia to the United States or Asia to Europe, you were looking at, in certain weeks, 25% of the capacity blanked. What happened was that was done in response to the falling off a cliff of the economies related to COVID. And then what happened, things came back in terms of number of shipments so quickly that it caused a lot of issues, and it caused a lot of cargo to not be moved and to be rolled cargo, meaning not getting on the ship. And it's created a lot of issues. And where it's ending up is a lot of excess cargo sitting in Asia in what we're calling a roll pool, and it's making its way to the United States and putting a lot of stress on the systems in the United States. So the question to the panelists is, how have you dealt with blank sailings? How big an issue was it for you? Has it been getting better? Generally, how did you react to it, and how big of an issue was it? So I'll leave that open, and you can jump in as you see fit, Gary and Brad and Rachel.
Sure, I'll address it first. Comoto collectively only moves about 1,000 containers a year, and historically, my preference was to utilize the asset-based carriers as the primary source for container activity. However, the blank sailing situation has put us in a situation where we have to have more options. And so 2 years ago, we went out and we started looking at some of the, it's the NVO market to, service providers that had access to lots of carriers and had lots of services and have been able to, fortunately, keep the impact fairly low.
Yeah, that's interesting. I spent 32 years on the carrier side. I've been with CAN about 9 years, and the NVO market share from Asia to the U.S. has been going up, in particular related to the issue you just brought up. About Rachel or Brad, any comments?
Well, this is Brad. I don't have a direct responsibility for that space, but I did consult with our leader in that area. And the answer is yes, those blank sailings have impacted Owens Corning in some way. We do bring product over from Asia as well as some from Europe, but primarily Asia is the impacted area. And so like a lot of companies, we've had to manage through that and where necessary, make maybe special arrangements to maybe spot rate some things just to make sure that we're getting at least the containers we must have brought into Canada and the West Coast. So it definitely has impacted Owens Corning.
And Brad and yes. Rachel and all the theory, has it led to any stock outages or production lines going down, anything like that? Maybe Rachel, do you have any issues with it?
No, I would say, for us, we go straight to the steamship line. So, it's emphasized the importance of the carrier relationship as well as the forecasts for us, continuing to underline the forecasts and how accurate you are and different aspects of it. But I think I would add to Gary's on that as well. We bring in about 8,000 FEU to North America on an annual basis on average. And I would say the blank sailings this year, the biggest impact I have seen is the ripple effect. So you talk about the roll pool in Asia, but there's also the ripple effect that it's had on, I would say, North American infrastructure. In having all of those blank sailings for the terminals all the way into the rail and your final destination, and now, accelerating out of that.
Yeah, the knock-on effect has been pretty significant. Not just, it's been across the board. I mean, all of this cargo that no one expected to move as quickly as it did, it began to move, number one, and number two, all the roll pools were there, and it began to affect dwell times in the marine facilities. It has affected the chassis fleet, which we'll talk about in a couple minutes. It's rolled through the whole system, and it's pretty good. You folks have seemed to have dealt with it pretty well, which is a compliment to you folks. That sort of rolls me into a second question, which is RFPs. We're sort of entering, and we will get into the heat of it maybe next after Lunar New Year, RFP season, request for proposal, RFQ, some people call it. And I've been telling customers for quite some time, when you're doing that and when you're creating your trip plans or your routing guides, to try to ensure that for any port pair, any lane, you have at least two asset options, two services rather than one. The kiss of death is to have one, because if one gets blanked, you're out of luck.
Mhm.
So that sort of leads right into this RFP. And how do you think, I'm not sure if you three companies do them, but to the extent that you have this world turned upside down, how do you see that, if at all, affecting how you approach your RFP, whether that means to go carrier direct or NVO plus carrier direct, changing the number of rounds you do? My personal opinions of the RFP processes in this business is it's sort of a train wreck a little bit in terms of, at least from the perspective of a provider, and it could be better. I'm just curious as to how you folks see that in general RFPs, but maybe more specifically, do you see that process changing based upon what's been happening in our business recently with COVID and a lot of the related issues? So again, just as you see fit, just jump in, Gary and Rachel and Brad.
Yeah, for sure. Our process is my process that I used in my prior life, and then still to this day, is to have a good, as Bill alluded to, a good mix of carriers. You certainly don't want to have all M2, M2 or 2M carriers, and try to keep it very diverse, both with asset-based carriers and the NVO market. We give carriers two rounds, provide them some feedback after that that second round, and then based on service and transit times and cost, we'll make our selections for for the coming year.
Okay. Any Rachel or Brad?
Yeah, I think for us, it's a very, very similar. I would add that I think, since the alliances came on the stage, that depending on the volume that you're moving, I would say, go for at least 3 different alliances, to the point of the blank sailings over the past couple years, or, at least have 2 alliances represented and 1 independent, depending on how you factor it in. I'm also a strong believer in 2 solid rounds, but I'll also note that, there's a potential for a third week, as you're finalizing, MQCs and, what your lane pairings will look like.
Yeah, it's I've done probably thousands of responding to RFPs, and it's surprising, how many companies will do 4 or 5, even 6 rounds with 14 providers. It makes your head spin a bit. Brad, how about you? What's your reaction?
Sure. So our ocean sourcing leader actually recently completed a bidding process, and I can't really speak too specifically on that. But again, He uses the word relationships, and I think Rachel mentioned it as well. That's key, I think, to our success, the way our company treats our carriers, whether they be ocean carriers or intermodal carriers. In my space, I actually just completed an RFP that kind of pulled it ahead into the 3rd quarter. I'm glad I did that. But anyway, mostly what I'm bidding out are 53-foot containers that are, again, going cross-country in Canada. Again, relationships are key, but I think, you mentioned that it's important to have multiple carriers, multiple options, because I like kind of what Gary said, because we have the same philosophy on sourcing. We just don't source to the lowest cost bidder. We take a lot of things into consideration: service, communication, cost, payment terms, the whole thing, transit time, and then we make a nice collective decision and introduce new carriers where possible. Just one final comment: we're heavily reliant on asset carriers, just to the nature of our business. We've got to have containers at origin for preloading purposes.
Yeah. Okay. That's a great summary of, I think, a good way to handle these things. And my experience, I may be a bit jaundiced about them, but I think what you described there in terms of, for example, not focusing on the unit cost of the particular box, but total cost across the whole supply chain makes a lot of sense. And I think RFP people that are conducting RFPs would be helped, I think, to focus more so on that than unit costs. But what you described, as I said, was a pretty good summary, I think, of a good way to run RFPs. Jump to the next topic, which I'm sure is going to be near and dear to many people, the three panelists, I suspect, and also many people on the call. It's detention and demurrage, which is very much in the news today for a variety of reasons. And if we go back to this whole blank sailing situation and then the move in the US economy from people spending money on services to spending money on goods, all that money not spent on restaurants, vacations, gym memberships has been pouring into buying stuff. Stuff needs to move in containers in many cases. And that has led to full warehouses these days with many, many boxes sitting outside the warehouse, marine boxes on top of a chassis. And those have those kind of things with being unable to discharge that cargo into the warehouse for a variety of reasons has led to a significant jump up in the detention and demurrage amounts that are paid by shippers. And this is a sensitive topic, around the industry. FMC has gotten involved in the past. And I would just put it to you folks, questions around detention demurrage, are the rules clear, for example? Do you think they're fair? Are the assets being priced correctly because you're using a chassis asset or a container asset? And sometimes people, I think, forget about the fact that a lot of the costs around that detention demurrage is an opportunity cost on the part of the carrier who wants to get the box back to Asia for another high-paying load. So my question sort of generally is, what's been your reaction to it? Have you seen increases? Do you think the rules around them are fair? That sort of thing. So again, I'll leave it open to the group and jump in where you see fit. I know it's a sensitive topic, but it's an important one.
I guess I'll jump in here. It's a tricky topic, and I wish I could say we were 100% immune, but I would say from a detention perspective, we've done our part, and that's the biggest talking part we've had with our partners. We're not sitting on anything, so I give huge kudos to our ops teams all throughout the company that we're handling everything well. I would focus in on, more of the demurrage part topic as it relates to the port terminals. I think that's been more of a pain point. I think whether you're sitting on your containers, as a shipper out, once it's outgated or, taking a while to get it offloaded. The challenge that's been created for the port terminals has created the situation where I've heard truckers reporting, that it takes up to 3 days, depending on the terminal that you're trying to get into, to get an open appointment. And then if you get in there, is the area going to be closed? Is there going to be a well-working chassis? And then if you run into any of those stop gates, the trucker's even empty-handed, and then you're trying to schedule a new appointment, and then you're running into that challenge. So watching the situation where the FMC is kind of monitoring this closely, it's a very, very tricky because there's not a one size fits all answer.
Yeah, when you figure that the daily charge for detention or demurrage is $150 to $200 per box, and then you've got some cases chassis on top of that, it's a lot of money. And I know in LA Long Beach the turn time, so from gate out to return, that time has doubled. It's now, I think they estimated it's like almost 7.5 days when it used to be about 3.5 days. Mm-hmm. So those additional average number of days across every box that leaves the gate, that's a lot of time. And if you're, depending on how much free time you have, if you're paying $150 or $200 after that free time is over, it turns into a big bill. So Brad and Gary, any reaction to any of that?
No, certainly. The one thing that we've taken an aggressive stance on is, number one, building a very solid relationship with our drayage companies and making sure that, they are aware of last 3 days, either at rail ramps or terminals, and then pulling equipment, when, prior to, any of those free times expiring. The other thing that, that I would point out is that, we also have to manage our distribution centers, very well, very tightly, and ensure that, that those containers, when those containers are available, that, that we do have dock space available to get them in a door and then unloaded. And our turn time, in most cases, at the DCs is 48 hours. It's available and heading back to, the terminals. But it's you really got to stay on top of that because it can get expensive very quickly.
Gary, I mentioned quickly before Brad jumps in here, but a lot of times people forget they have multiple container rules, and there are a tranche of charges. So for the first 10 days, it's X, and for day 11 plus to day 20, it is X, plus a lot of money. And then and people forget you have a box that's lost for a while for 30 days, and it turns into a big bill.
Yeah, for sure.
How about you, Brad?
So we don't have what I would consider a big demurrage problem at the terminals. I think our team is doing a great job with our dray providers. Again, I think we've built some great relationships with those providers. We have not experienced a significant issue in terms of demurrage at the ports. In my world, in terms of container detention, just on domestic shipments, we do face some of that, and some of it's self-imposed as we're moving insulation cross-country or cross-border. We sometimes inundate a warehouse, frankly, with just too many containers to unload at one time. And so they sit, and we, frankly, we just have to, sort of pay our fair share of that. And as soon as it's empty, we get it on its way. But so we do face some detention on the 53-foot container side, but not really much of an issue in terms of demurrage.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Thanks, Brad. Let's jump again forward here and talk about the next topic, which is trucking. And when it comes to trucking, I'm most familiar with the dray business, and I know in the dray business, certainly in Southern California, the rates have gone up, and there's all these other ancillary issues about the shortage for drivers. That has been around for quite some time, and you've got this issue of, are the drivers employees, or are they in the future? Are they going to be employees in the future when today they are independent contractors, which is likely to lead to higher costs. But in terms of the trucking end of the business, as we're moving these marine containers around, have you folks noticed any impact of? And from my perspective, I will say this: from my perspective, I think the dray business, in this whole crazy world we've been facing this year, has done very, very well from what I have seen in terms of availability, et cetera, et cetera. They have to deal with a lot of issues about where they're returning the empties, et cetera. But more recently, we've seen this spike, at least we have, spike in dray cost, which is not a surprise when you consider this wave of cargo that's coming through the West Coast. So you have this immediate issue in trucking of this wave of cargo forcing up dray rates, and somewhat longer term issues of driver availability, this employee versus independent contractor. How are you folks dealing with this sort of the changes that are unfolding over time as it relates to trucking, including the short term ones of quite a bit higher cost?
So I think I'm going to echo Gary on this one. I think it's a strong relationship with your dray partner. We have great partners that we work with out in the California area, and they have done an awesome job of kind of balancing that so it becomes a non-issue for us as a shipper. They're handling that in-house with their own mix of, whether it's employee or contract drivers. And they've managed the mix. We also give them a forecast of what we're expected to bring in, and they do a great job of helping manage the flow in and out of our buildings to and from the port terminals, and then making sure the communication is there. So if they're having a challenge, we've got the relationships with the steamship line, and even sometimes the terminals to, help make a phone call and clear some roadblocks.
Yeah, I mean, a good forecast in the transportation business, at least in my 47 years, I guess it is now, a good forecast is worth its weight in gold if in terms of providing the service you've promised to the customer. So the fact that, Rich, you mentioned the forecast, I think is important. Gary and Brad, any comments on any of the issues we just brought up on trucking?
For sure. We haven't seen a whole lot of issues, with drayage service providers. Like I said earlier, we've done a pretty decent job in establishing those relationships. But the feedback that we're getting from our partners is, as you alluded to earlier, Bill, the dwell times between, container availability, vessel ETA, and then container availability is growing. We've seen that grow from anywhere from 3 to 5 days to 7 to 10 days in some cases now. So and truckers are getting having difficulty getting appointments at the terminals once the container does become available. Yeah.
How about you, Brad?
Again, not too many issues on the dray side, at least on the coastal cities. Again, good.
Hey,
good
Brad, are you draying mostly to transload facilities?
No, direct to customers, and they're nice short lanes. So I think we're benefiting from the nature of those characteristics. Short lanes, drivers are on it, and we don't hear of too many issues. Similar to Gary, it's really not much of an issue. In my space, again, on the installation side, in the middle of the country, where we're trying to move a product potentially a long way to a terminal or a ramp, sometimes we are having a little bit of dray issue and some service issues with pickup times and things like that. But again, that's more probably in the center of the country where we're having some of those issues. And since I manage the dry van space, again, the whole trucking issue, is what I live and breathe, every hour of the day these days, which is why I'm glad I got my intermodal bid behind me now, because that's kind of what I'm concentrating on now.
Yeah, those the intermodal bids and what people are looking forward to in terms of cost, et cetera, has been in the press a lot recently. So I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, the trucking is, like I said, we meaning Kuehne+Nagel, we do quite a bit, obviously on behalf of our clients, and I think our comments would be pretty close to your folks. I think again our partners, as Rachel pointed out, have done a very good job. So I would kudos to the dray business for handling this onslaught so well. So I would give them high grades for that. Next topic. One next to my, and I'm part of disclosure here. I used to be the chairman of OSEMA, and I think we might get some boos from the audience if we could hear the audience. About 10 years ago, I was the chairman of OSEMA for a number of years, which is OSEMA is the carrier based group that manages the carrier-based chassis assets and container assets, which the world has changed in those 10 years. But chassis still seem to be at the forefront of what's happening in the business today. And we alluded to it earlier when we talked about detention demurrage and longer dwell times, et cetera. And the industry has changed. The carriers used to own or long-term lease just about all the chassis. Now they're owned primarily by three leasing companies, Track, CLI, and FlexiVan. And it's been changing over time. The ownership changed and how they were dealt with has changed. And it's still changing with more and more BCOs and truckers buying their own chassis as opposed to using pool chassis, et cetera. There have been chassis shortages in LA Long Beach, chassis shortages in New York. And obviously not totally surprising given this onslaught of cargo. It's been a thorny issue, and the industry, has had some issue sorting it out, so to speak, to get the most effective and efficient network of chassis. And I'm wondering to pose to you folks, both how it's going for you now. Do you have any ideas on what would work better for you? Are you buying your own chassis? Are you sticking with is your trucker sticking with pool chassis? Sort of generally, how is it going? Because it has been a thorny issue for quite some time. And I will say this also, I worked for Sealand for 25 years, and Sealand was the company that started this whole problem of carriers provided chassis industry in 1956. So I'm somewhat familiar with what's been going on, but it has been a thorny issue. It continues to be, and I think the industry is still trying to work through how to solve it. And I'm curious as to what your thoughts are about how you've been dealing with it, and do you have any ideas on how it might work better?
Yeah, we haven't had a whole lot of challenges getting access to chassis. Our drayage companies, do utilize a mix of pool and their own chassis.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, let's jump to Rachel. Gary, maybe we'll sort it out. Okay, Rachel, what about you?
I would second Gary. We have a partner that utilizes, their own pool of chassis as well as they use the gray pool. It's interesting with the intro you provided. To me, it almost feels like we've been on this gerbil wheel of
Yeah.
this topic keeps coming up, and I feel like there should be some giant prize at the end for whoever can solve the issue, whether it's at the rail, it's at the port terminals, but I know there's a finite number of chassis. There's always the question of how many are in disrepair, and just how do you move the box. We have some containers we terminate CY and we arrange the dray directly, and then we have other containers we book to door. So, one of my fun questions posed to ocean carriers sometimes is, how do you book a door rate when you don't have capacity to ensure that it gets to the final destination, because you kind of need that chassis.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because you have all these moving pieces and parts that are required to move a single box.
Yeah. I used to, when I was in the business many years ago, we used to refer to, if you wanted to describe to someone who wasn't involved in the kind of transportation we're involved in, to describe it, I used to tell people that just think of an airline business where the passengers took their seats home with them. That would be similar to what we have to go through in this business with chassis and with containers. It's like the air passenger taking their seat home with them. You have to recollect everything. It's sort of an odd world. But Brad, how about you?
Yeah, it sounds like Owens Corning doesn't have the same sort of active engagement as Rachel and Gary do in chassis management issues and opportunities. We sort of channel that responsibility out to our partners. So I don't really have anything to add in terms of that. I just don't think we have a big problem with it because we have our partners manage that mostly.
Yeah, I think I'll maybe just end this particular topic. When I just try to describe it to the sort of way this works or how it's worked historically, is when the carriers owned or long-term leased the chassis, they fundamentally were getting a zero return. And it was $2 to $3 billion at the time. This is 10 years ago. $2 to $3 billion worth of chassis were roaming around the United States, and the carriers were, through their own fault or not, accepting a zero return on those assets. And one of the big things is, and I think it's a better way to do things, these assets are now owned by people who expect a return on the assets. So part of this change in the world has been transitioning from a zero return asset to an asset that makes its cost of capital or something like that, which has led to some bumps in the road. But I think, in the economy we all live in, that's the right way to do things. But it has led to some friction in the market. Let's put it that way. Let me before we pause here for questions and stuff, let me throw one other thing in here. And it's a big question about how long this whole craziness of all this cargo hitting the West Coast and the problems rolling from Asia to the West Coast facilities, into the dray market, into the chassis market, into the 53-foot market, intermodally moving to the ramps in the middle of the country. How long do you, I still think there's this mismatch between economic activity, GDP, which is still going to be down for the year. But for example, in August, trade was the same this year as it was last year, after having taken a total nosedive in Q2. So the question is this going to go right through Lunar New Year? Is it going to go through the end of the year or beyond? What do you folks think? What are you seeing in your businesses in terms of the length of this big surge of cargo? Are you planning for it to continue, or do you think it's going to end? Jump in as you see fit.
Yeah, I think our plans is it's going to continue. Definitely 2021 issue. And if I were just to one person's opinion, I'm thinking mid 2021, probably before we go through a couple more, I'll call them mini cycles. There's so many things that can happen in the next 9 to 12 months. And then that's when I think things might start to normalize in terms of that activity.
Yeah, it's like I said before, there's been this gigantic shift from spending on experiences or spending on services, and now people are spending it on do-it-yourself stuff, their houses, their gardens, et cetera, and it's really pushed it. And I guess part of the question is, will that continue? I don't know, Rachel, what do you think? Are people spending more time hiking and spending money on Merrill shoes?
I think you're hitting the nail on the head. I think there is a shift in consumer buying behavior that's been well documented, over the past couple of months, where people are working towards either working on their homes or doing things that's more of a solo activity. I think carefully touching on this one, Bill, I think to your point, it's more about how much has shifted from the service sector to actually tangible import goods. And besides my own import volume, it's been a key the past couple months of keeping track of what are all the different segments doing that's impacting the imports, that's causing all of these ports and terminals to see some really large volume jumps compared to 2019 and the congestion that's coming off of it.
Yeah, for sure. We just closed out our fiscal 2020 and had a significant uptick in sales throughout COVID, to the point where we've kind of concluded that COVID has fast forwarded our business by about 3 years, and our biggest challenge right now is getting our Asian, Pakistan origin vendors to get caught up on order input. We're still seeing, vendors behind, can't keep up with demand. And so, we're anticipating, volume to maintain and grow over, the next 12 months. So we feel that, that this surge that we're seeing, in the motorcycle industry is going to continue.
Yeah, and glad to have you back, Gary. We got you back. But yeah, I think that's spot on as well. And what people sometimes, I think, don't forget, but doesn't get as much publicity in this business is, and you combine this switch from services to spending on goods, you combine that with the continued growth in intermodal. It's forcing more cargo to move more quickly, which is forcing it to the West Coast plus truck and rail, right? Versus someone shipping to the East Coast to go to the Ohio Valley or that kind of thing. So part of the reason is not just this onslaught of more cargo. It is also the need for speed, so to speak. And more people are using the West Coast, and combining that with rail, a rail and a 53-footer basically, or actually team trucking or something to get it to their customers more quickly. Given the move toward e-commerce and the move toward ever briefer delivery times for customers, and it's so it may not go away as soon as people think. But okay, let's maybe pause here, and I think Hal, you've been accumulating any kind of questions, and maybe we said we would pause here at about 1:15, and I think it's about that time now. Yeah, it's 2:45 on the East Coast. So Hal, do you want to jump in here to see what kind of questions we're getting?
Yeah, well, that was great, folks. I really appreciate what we've talked about so far. Really terrific. We've got a lot of questions, so I'm going to try to get through as many of these as we can. So bear with me as I hop back and forth between screens here. But the first one is. And we'll jump right into probably what could be a closer for everybody. But from the panelist perspective, what are your top 2 to 3 supply chains most challenging pain points right at the moment?
I'll tackle that one. I'll give you 2. So one would be schedule reliability. I would love to see the on-water schedule reliability increase. because I think it would have a positive ripple effect all the way through to destination, final destination. And then second pain point is really the parcel network right now. As a person who's preparing for holiday peak, the fact that the parcel network is hugely over capacity and even impacting the rail schedules is going to be one that's going to be top on my radar.
For sure. You know, I would mirror Rachel's concern about the parcel capacity going into the holidays. We're seeing problems now. We're concerned about, you know, what that's going to look like, you know, Cyber Monday and into the holiday. The other thing that, you know, pinch point that we've had that, you know, has hurt us fairly significantly is the Trump tariffs, or the tariffs that were put into place, you know, over the last year or so. It's had a significant impact on our business to the point where, you know, we're having to do a lot to look for ways, creative legal ways to mitigate what those costs are.
That's a great one, and that was one of the first questions that came in, was around the trade war, and you know.
Hey, Hal.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Just I'll throw one quick thing in. Rachel brought up schedule reliability on the vessel side, and I don't want to offend anybody, but I would not hold your breath waiting for the on time. I mean, on time has been 75 to 80% globally forever, pretty much. And we could get into a longer discussion here, but I would not. I think the best solution to this is when you look at the schedule and it says 12 days transit time, in your plan put 16 days. Mm-hmm. That's the solution.
Yeah, the words of experience from inside. Thanks, Bill. So yeah, just to kind of pivot back to that the trade war question. Has the trade war and the tariffs on imported goods changed the way that you work, whether it was your sourcing or other supply chain decisions that you all have made?
Yeah, I mean, for Comoto, we've had to, you know, take numerous steps to help mitigate some of that cost, from sharing some of the expense with some of our foreign vendors, to raising prices, you know, to help maintain, acceptable margin levels. So yeah, we've put a lot of effort into, trying to mitigate, those additional costs.
Yeah, I would echo that here. We have a robust customs team in-house, and as well as our sourcing team. It's a top topic. I get a lot of questions about, looking at alternative routes and options. And, when you talk about sourcing diversification, there's some big changes that you've got to prepare for, as well as, to Bill's point, plan for 12, it says 12, plan for 16. And when you start diversifying away from, South Asia, you start to see transit times that easily are published at 30 some days.
Mm-hmm. I would say from Owens Corning perspective, certainly the trade conversation has impacted us to a certain extent, but I don't know if we made any major changes as a result of any policies that have been enacted or reversed. Our products, I think we've worked hard to make sure that they are classified, or at least verified that they've been classified as meeting certain criteria that potentially put them in a certain classification that doesn't impact Owens Corning as much. So I know a lot of work has been done on that front in terms of bringing product in from Mexico, Asia, and Europe.
Great. This pivots back a little bit, but this question is about gateway selection, and how has particularly the congestion that's been built up by this sort of release of cargo particularly from Asia, but how has that congestion factored into your consideration of alternative gateways for your goods?
For Comoto, I lived through the early 2000s West Coast lockdown. So ever since then, we've taken a very diverse approach to selecting, routing. We have distribution centers here in Philadelphia as well as Louisville, Kentucky, and then, as I mentioned earlier, Las Vegas. And we try to to balance out the coastal volume and make sure that if there is an issue on one coast or another, that we've got volume routing into one of the opposing DCs.
Yeah, I would second what Gary said. It's diversification, and that goes back. Same thing. Went through the same pain points on the West Coast, and you've got to have diversification not only on U.S. ports but through your Canadian ports as well. And I think the most recent example that comes to my mind is the Port of Montreal situation. When it was potentially an indefinite strike with absolutely no end date. It shows that you need to have diversification and you need to have your freight coming in through multiple gateways.
I would just quickly note, having been through this a couple of times, or many, many times, is the mistake I think many people make is rather than set their initial plan to include multiple gateways, whether it's LA plus Prince Rupert or plus Montreal or whatever it's going to be, they believe after the congestion has started that that's the time to make the adjustment in their routings, which is virtually impossible. Certainly during a labor action and many of these cases, if you begin to search out alternative gateways after the fact, it almost never works. Mm-hmm. To do this at the time you're creating your initial routing guide or whatever, to have 2 or more gateways if you can do it, then you've built up a track record with your carriers, and then it can work. But if you try to do it after the fact, it's almost certainly not going to.
I would just say, just for Owens Corning, we have multiple options, and I think that's helped us to mitigate some of the specific congestion that's going on the West Coast.
Here's one that kind of digs into partner selection. So when you're selecting your transportation partners, and this is really for everyone, how do you rank? And they're giving you service, price, and safety record of that partner. And I'm sure that, and I know you guys have each mentioned a couple of other factors, but in terms of partner selection, what are the things that you're looking for in terms of making an outstanding partner?
For me and for our team, it's about being able to establish a relationship. There's having somebody available when problems arise, and there's nothing more frustrating to have a problem and not be able to get a hold of somebody. And we've all been around long enough to know that there are going to be problems, and they've got to be worked through. But that relationship, being able to call somebody, whatever, if it's on the weekends and they're available, that's a huge step for us. We also look, obviously, cost always has to weigh into it, and you're looking for that service provider that is available, they're cost competitive, and as we're all trying to get to, reliable.
Yeah, I would say for us, we're a CT-PAT, PIP, and AEO importer. So security and safety is it's the cost of entrance into an RFP or partner selection. So, from an operations perspective, service is my top priority. And then I have to balance it with my procurement and my financial folks who, may want to put more emphasis on the finance side of it. So it ends up being a good balance between the two. Otherwise, if service is poor, you're going to pay more in the long run. So there has to be a balance.
Yeah, Hal, you'll like my answer, because the answer is it depends, which I think we used earlier today. And it depends on, kind of what Rachael said. We're here to satisfy our business leaders we're satisfying our customers, and they may have differing needs. I will say that mostly though, service is going to be the overarching measurement that we look at. Does the carrier or provider do what they say they're going to do? To Gary's point, are they communicating fully and transparently, even if it's bad news? And through those metrics that we have, then you layer in the cost and some of the other factors. But primarily, are they doing what they say they're going to do, and have they proven that they can do that over a sustained period? That's somebody who's going to get our attention in terms of a sourcing decision.
Great. How about you, Bill? Do you guys have any particular hot buttons that you try to look for when you're selecting partners?
I mean, I would sort of echo a lot of things that have been said by the others. I mean, it has to do with, a lot of it is when you get into a pinch, you're in a pinch, are they going to come through for you? Yes or no? Or if they don't do it all the time, do they do it a reasonable amount of time when you have an issue? Can they address it? Are the communication lines solid? No one expects you come up with 10 horrible problems over a given year. I don't think anybody expects any partner to resolve all 10, but do they make a real effort at 7 of them, And I think it's that kind of thing. Rate's an issue, obviously, but beyond that, it's communication, it's responsiveness, it's a variety of things, and you have to add all of those things up, and we do, and we have very solid relationships with our partners, but it's based on a set of criteria rather than, let's say, simple box rate.
No, I think that's great for our attendees to hear. I think we've got time for maybe 2 more questions, so I'll try to get them in really quickly. The first is about technology, and it's a 2-parter. The question is, how has technology changed your business, and what other changes would you like to see from technology? So it's sort of what do you have, and what would you like to see?
I mean, from Komoto's standpoint, we grew up as a technology company, out of the gate under the Revzilla brand, and our CEO recently, gave us a directive that we need to move away from a technology company and become a retailer. We've got the 3 brands that we're working under now, and that we really want to focus on capturing market share and improving customer experience, expanding customer experience in our retail locations, and so we're really while everything that we do is tech based, and we're investing heavily in technology. We're really trying to move in a direction that we're putting our customers first and not so tech focused.
I think the biggest impact I would say COVID-19 has had, and I mean, this is almost a simplistic answer, has just been utilizing the technology and tools that we've had at our disposal the whole time. I think, having an entire team that is remotely deployed from their own individual home offices, we've gotten really adept at, these virtual platforms. And to me, I think it just, it opens the door further as we work as a global company with global partners. There's a lot more you can do when you're adept at using these different platforms, whether it's, Zoom like we're on, or the various other tools, just to have that face-to-face that you might not have had before.
And Al, Owens Corning makes use of shipment tracking, in terms of one area of technology on the ocean side and the dry van side, and that's an important feature for our customers as they can use their customer portal to just basically find where's my truck. And that's proven to be a good feature that Owens Corning is providing. We're relying more and more on that tracking process.
Hey, Hal, let me throw one thing in here. What I've seen there's this big question, I think, in the business today when you have, and not to point at any particular set of assets, it's a lot of different sets of assets that are somewhat unreliable. And you have these unreliable, and I don't mean that to throw stones, it's just sort of a fact of life that there are issues that come up that make them somewhat unreliable. At the same time, you have customers who want shorter and shorter and shorter delivery times. And there's sort of this dissonance between the two. And I don't think the money's not going to be there to make those assets 100% reliable or 98% reliable. I think the only way to bridge that gap that we have today, and it's just going to be a bigger gap in the future, is better visibility, as Brad brought up. And I think that's going to run toward big data and machine learning, producing dynamic ETA, port ETA, a dynamic ETA for door, those kind of things, allowing people to bridge that gap between somewhat unreliable assets and shorter delivery times from customers. We're not there yet, but we're getting pretty close.
It'd be great to see AI and have a schedule update all the way through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think we've certainly seen some tools that are tantalizingly close to it, but the application across the supply chain is the real challenge there, because they're only as good as where they're applied, right? And you really, to your points, need it spread out so you can really see from the entirety of your risk. Well, I wish we could keep going because there's a lot more questions, and I've got a bunch of questions that I could just kind of chat with you guys all day. But out of respect to your time and our attendees, we're gonna wrap it up here. But I do want to thank you all very much for your time and joining us today. I know a lot of you are really busy, and you really worked hard to carve out this time for us, so I very much appreciate it. A special nod to Bill's wife for letting us get Bill today, because he is supposed to be hiking right now, and he's with us. So
my wife is scowling at you, Hal.
Well,
not on camera.
I deserve it, but I appreciate you taking the time. But to everybody, thank you very much. And with that, we are going to say until next time. Hopefully, we'll be able to do it together next time. But I really appreciate everybody making the time.
Thanks, Hal.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this IANA Signature Series presentation, part of the Business of Intermodal Continues program. Don't miss our upcoming signature sessions, Bright Ideas, IANA's Innovation Incubator, on December 10th. For more information about these sessions and the entire Business of Intermodal Continues program, please visit intermodal.org. IANA, the connecting force behind intermodal freight.